Morning, GameCity. Good morning. Try again. There are a lot of people in this room, and that didn't sound like a lot of people. Good morning, GameCity. Good, thank you. It's Friday. We're getting very tired. Keith had 2 hours of sleep last night. Today is going to be a rather more casual breakfast show because on the second half we have a birthday girl guest. But before we do that, we're going to do a little bit of serious talk with a couple of game developers we have here, one of whom is showing his game downstairs, and one of whom has a secret game that he's going to try and talk about without talking about. So that's something to look forward to. Do you guys want to introduce yourself? We have Seb here.
Yeah, I'm Seb Lees from Sumo Digital, and well, downstairs you can see him playing my game Snake Pass.
There was a cheer for Sumo Digital, who sponsored GameCity this year. So I think a cheer for Sumo Digital. And then over here we have...
I'm Jack Attridge. I run a company called Flavorworks, and I'm not sponsoring GameCity.
Boo! Now, the reason that Jack is not sponsoring GameCity, though, is because he is putting all his money into making his own game. Where did you used to work, though?
I used to work at a place called 22 Cans. I made a few interesting disaster pieces, and then decided maybe it was time to make my own stuff. Make my own disaster piece, basically, yeah.
Keith, you need a microphone if you're going to make jokes.
So that's what I've been doing for the last 18 months is doing that from a sofa, and then in the last couple of months doing that with a bit more money in an office in London. So, bit of a journey.
You're going up in the world. You've got an office in London now.
Failing upwards.
Failing upwards. Nice. Very Peter Molyneux.
That sounds like the next management blockbuster book, like the lean in from the Facebook founder, Failing Upwards.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure there's already a book called that.
Wear a really smart shirt and walk back and forth on a stage with like big words on the screen saying "failing upwards." What does that really mean? That's what I envision.
Both of you have started recently working on your own stuff. So Seb, you're still with Sumo, but you're making a game that you came up with in a game jam, right? Do you want to tell us a little bit about how that happened?
Yeah, so Sumo traditionally makes video games for other clients, like big clients like Microsoft, Sony. We work on Crackdown 3, Dead Island 2, like big IPs. But Sumo always had the desire to make something of their own. So last year, under the leadership of Ian Livingston, we introduced the game jams. And we were allowed to, for one day, essentially work on anything you wanted that could lead to a game idea. So we had about 22 teams of our studio trying to come up with something. I was a one-man team, and I made a simple little prototype of a snake crawling around in a green meadow. And that actually won. One thing led to another. And initially, I got just 2 people to try to get something we could put out real quickly. But after a month, when we showed the bosses what we've done after a month, they were like, "This is too good to just rush out. So have some more money, have some more people."
Wow! Congratulations.
And that happened a couple more times, and by now we're up to 22 people on my team working on my little game. Yeah.
So the game jam was a competition to find out what Sumo would work on next, and you won out of how many teams did you say?
I think there were about 22 entries on the first.
Okay. And so your game Snake Pass, for those who don't know, can you explain basically how it works and then where the idea came from?
It's a physics-based platforming game where you play as a snake, and the idea comes from actually me trying to. I was actually experimenting in Unreal Engine, which was new for me at the time. And I was trying to make a rope that would move when the player walks into it. And while I was making that, I forgot to attach it to the ceiling. When it fell down on the floor in this nice little turret shape, I thought, wow, that type of motion, I've never seen that in a video game before. I want to do something with that. So I tried to make the rope controllable. So the very first character, the very first version of the character was actually a rope crawling around.
But you had snakes as a kid, right?
Yes, that's right.
Pet
Yeah, I actually come from a completely different background. I did university study for biology, and I actually was a biology teacher for 4 years in Holland. And I'm not very happy with that job at the time because I always wanted to do something with video games, but I sort of pushed myself in the wrong corner with my education by picking biology.
You thought biology, that's a good way to end up making video games.
No, I always wanted to end up in video games, but I always was encouraged to choose science studies by my parents, and not in a negative way, but I just ended up in the wrong path, and I was so unhappy with that I spent more and more time in my free time just making video game related stuff. And fortunately, 4 years ago, I got noticed by putting my stuff online. I got noticed by Sumo Digital, and they sent me a magical email, which I still refer to it. Would you like to work for us? Which I instantly said, yes, I'd love to work for you.
Do you want to tell us exactly what the stuff was that you were working on that Sumo saw and thought was really good? Was it mods or levels for?
Well, it all started for me with the PC game Spore. It's a pretty old PC game.
Oh, I love Spore.
I played that for many hours. I made thousands of creatures and vehicles, and that's when I found out that I'm pretty good at it and that I just love making stuff, which I didn't really know before then. And that was actually the first sign that I might have picked the wrong study. So yeah, Spore is what it started with me, and I tried really hard to get a job in the game industry through Spore, but after about 2 years I realized that was not going to happen. So then I heard online that people who were very good at Little Big Planet were getting hired by the creators of Little Big Planet. So I bought a PlayStation, I bought Little Big Planet 2, or Little Big Planet 1 at the time actually, and I spent hundreds, probably thousands of hours making content for Little Big Planet, putting that online and getting lots of plays and subscribers. And after 2 years of doing that every day, I finally got the email from Sumo, would you like to work on Little Big Planet 3?
Yeah.
So that's how it started for me.
Because a lot of people don't realise that like modding is actually quite a good way to get into the industry, isn't there? In the early 90s, when people would make their own levels for Doom and for Half-Life, they actually found themselves being employed then by id Software and Valve to make stuff. A lot of people don't realise that, you know, if you use the creativity tools in video games, that can be a way into the industry, can't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's at the same wave that I got hired, because Sumo at the time was making Little Big Planet 3, and they were lacking the expertise of the engine to actually make that game efficiently. So they hired about, I think, 8 to 10 people from all across the world, from the community, who were prolific creators. And all of them, except for 2, still work at Sumo at the moment. They've all moved to other projects, and they're actually some of the most valuable designers and coders that we have now. Yeah.
And I just wanted to go back very quickly to the game jam that your studio held. This is something that lots of studios seem to be doing around the world and have done for a couple of years. Like Double Fine, the company set up by Tim Schafer from LucasArts, who made all those wonderful adventure games. They do a regular game jam, and so do the creators of Surgeon Simulator, whose name Bossa. Yeah, they do one almost every month, and I guess, I mean, it must be a risk for the studio, mustn't it? Because you're taking everyone out of production for 2 days. But as your story shows, it's sometimes worthwhile.
Yes, yeah. We actually, the idea mainly came from the Double Fine game jam, and we wanted to do one for a long time. It was actually Ian Livingstone that pushed us through and said, yeah, we should really just do this. And yeah, I don't think anyone regretted it, because I won from the first 22 entries, but there were at least 3 more entries from that same game jam that were actually good enough to work into a real game. And since then we've had 2 more game jams, and the 2 winners of those also led to really nice prototypes, which might actually be developed further after we're done with this one.
That's really cool. So what's it like then at 22 Cans, Jack? Are people allowed to express their own creative visions, or is it just purely working on Peter Molyneux's genius?
Peter's always considered himself a curator of ideas, I think. So he's really good at like taking talent, and you can see that in the like some of his earlier companies had a lot of the people that went on to like found Media Molecule and other places like that. The whole Guildford games industry sort of expanded from that. But I think in my experience in the last few years, I was very much definitely serving Peter's vision, and that was something I think everyone wanted to do. We were really cool at. I think personally for me, I just got to the point where I was like, okay, I've sort of got a bit of an itch to scratch in terms of like making my own thing. And I went to like a show by a company called Punch Drunk called The Drowned Man. It was like an immersive theatre show, and it changed my life. Like, I went 4 times, and it's like 50 quid a ticket, so it's like not like easy to like afford. And I just sat there every time being like, why am I making games? And it wasn't that I didn't want to make games, I just felt a bit miffed, I guess, with what they were now, because this thing really resonated with me. And so I sort of got an idea of how could I sort of rekindle some of the magic I felt there in a video game. And I went to a guy I worked with called Pavle, who's my co-founder at Flavorworks. He was at 22 Cans. And I said, hey, do you think we could try something with these mechanics and manipulating stuff in a certain way? And he came back and said no. And Unreal couldn't do Unity, so he had to build an engine from the ground up. And first he said no to that as well, but after some moaning, he tried it, and then he went online to try and work out how to do it. Turned out no one online knew how to do it, so eventually I just said, work harder, which is my job. And then so eventually he came up with this engine, he came back, and we said, okay, well, let's try and create like a 5-minute demo, which we did a couple of months before we left 22 Cans. And at first, I think Peter was a little bit, not happy, bummed with that. But then he sort of came around and became very fatherly and supportive about that whole thing, and gave us some like advice going out the door. And then that demo, this ties into Ian Livingstone as well. That demo then sort of ended up doing really well, like in terms of like going to investors and stuff. Like everyone got it, like they really wanted to pick it up. But it was also really hard to get the deal we needed to make the game because we're sort of two nobodies whose last game was, sort of quite controversially.
What was your last game, Jack?
The last game at 22 Cans was Goddess.
Right.
And then I started working on a game called The Trail, which I think is coming out soon, but that was only for like the first 5 months, sort of conceptually and stuff. And so, anyway, so then Peter calls me one day. He's just like, how's the whole investment thing going? I'm like, oh, yeah, we've got a few offers, but they're not great. And then he went to a games night he's been having for like the last 30 years, every Tuesday night without fail, with like Ian Livingstone and Steve Jackson and stuff. And he just mentioned it to one of them there. And he called me up, woke me up the next morning, like really early. I was just like, Jack, I've mentioned this idea to Ian Livingstone. He might come down to the studio Wednesday. And I was like, well, we might have to sign a deal like tomorrow. And he's like, just hold off, and wait for Wednesday. So Ian came into a meeting room with Peter on 2 days later, and we showed him the game in 5 minutes. They were like, we're going to help you out, get you your first little bit to get you on that road. And then Ian came on as like a chairman, which means he could go into meetings with us and negotiate like the bulldog and with all of his experience and stuff like that. And then from there, for the last 18 months, it's just been like throwing away tons and tons of work trying to get to a quality level that we're happy with. And it really annoys me because like whenever I show people this demo from like 18 months ago, they're like, why don't you just show that? But like it just, because I think the whole Goddess thing was so public, and which was a very different way for Peter to develop, and probably had an awful lot to do with, I guess, a lot of the changes in expectations with that game and stuff. I just decided, don't show it or don't say anything about it until I can show it, sort of thing. Right. And it's sort of, so I found like I can sort of talk about the philosophies of it a little bit. Like, I mean, the whole take of going for it in the end was sort of like doing our own Citizen Kane of like the sort of, if we were going to design one game and it's going to either blow up or it's in up or down sort of thing, as in like maybe never make a game again, shouldn't it just sort of tick all the boxes that we personally like feel, about how you go about expressing emotion in games and telling stories and all of that sort of stuff. So it's a little bit of a ambitious project, I guess. Is that a word? I have shown you, of course.
I've seen it, but I'm not allowed to talk about it. Would you say, though, that there are any... because you said you were inspired by your experience of going to see Punch Drunk 4 times. Would you say that... I mean, because you're making a video game, you're not making an immersive theatre experience like Punch Drunk, but would you say there are some kind of links between what you see in a Punch Drunk experience and what's going to be in your game?
The thing that blew my mind about it was the feeling of discovery. The fact that I could also like really... You could just get so much off of the expression. Like there's like a Mark Cerny quote, how it's like a multi-million-dollar investment in video games to get anything close to a human face. And all they have to do in like theatre or film is just like bring an actress on and get all of that nuance straight away. And I love the way you could sort of capture that and immediately get close to those characters. And it's so funny, most games, the camera is always directly behind the player, looking at this really non-expressive like back of their head, and it's like, and that always comes from like little things like how we navigate in games, and suddenly like circumventing around some chairs becomes the hardest thing in a video game that should be relatively easy in real life. And it's like, so why is that the bit of expression we're focusing on? And generally I think that's because the sort of first thing you do when you're prototyping is slap a 3D cube in Unity and try and make it move around, and everything comes out of that. So we just start saying, okay, can you do things in a different way that means that you don't have to have the camera behind the character's head all the time. You can be looking at their face, for instance. And the other thing with that whole Punch Drunk thing was that it was an incredibly tactile world. Like, it wasn't like you're walking around the sort of walls of a room waiting for the controller to vibrate or a little glimmer to say, you can interact with this item, and then the character goes and talks about it for half an hour. It's like, what I love is games like The Room, where it really feels like you can slide open a lock, with all that nuance, and then you can just open it up and see what's inside and lean in and give it essentially that feeling of presence and depth but then use all of that to tell a story with our medium rather than, you know, a linear medium, for instance.
Yeah. And you're both obviously you're still at Sumo, but you've got a small team working now, and you've got a very, very small team. What are the kind of pros and the disadvantages of that? Obviously, there's disadvantage in that you can't get 500 art people to be generating assets for you. But I'm just wondering, what's the kind of atmosphere like on a small development studio, and how does that help you with creativity?
I think it's really nice to work in a small team, because before this I worked on Little Big Planet 3, which was a pretty big team. I think on the peak we were probably over 150 people on that, just to finish it off. So yeah, you just become sort of maybe a more insignificant little piece in the big machinery when you're in a big team like that. And in this small little game, everybody really has a significant part or significant role in the team. Not that that's not the case in a bigger game, but you just feel like you're more involved in small decisions, and everybody knows pretty much what everyone else is working on it all the time, and it's just a much more connectivity, much more communication between the team members, I think. I really prefer working in a small team like this over the bigger ones, yeah.
What about you, Jack?
Well, for us, it started with just me and Pavle for the first year or so, just on our sofa, because we didn't have any money to hire anybody. We had the little bit just to mean that we didn't have to go and get other work. It wasn't until we finally signed a deal, I guess a few months ago, that we moved to Old Street and got a little office and filled it with a few people. And even then, it's trying to, the way, without giving anything away, because it's really hard, the sort of development structure of our game is quite weird. It requires quite a lot of disciplines, and it really, from even different industries, and it really sort of fronts narrative first. So, and that ends up putting a blocker on a lot of developing of assets, for instance. So we've thrown out 5 feature-length scripts now from writers from game and film, guy writers, girl writers, just trying to try it from very different perspectives. And we're finally going to a place where we're like, okay, this feels like we could have shipped maybe one of those other 5 games, but the one we've got now we feel a lot better about. And so that doesn't, so we can't even bring in more people until we feel like that stage is nailed, because we don't want to sort of hack the story on the back end of it. We really want this to inform everything. It's not, it's almost like game design becomes, or level design becomes unimportant, and narrative becomes the replacement for that sort of thing. And then just because of the way we were like, how can we make something this ambitious effectively, and with the certain way that we're just trying to make our lives harder by doing weird things, we have a lot of contractors that will come in for certain periods in the sort of in dozens. And then it goes back to the initial 4 again, with a couple of contractors in-house most of the time, and then goes back to dozens and comes back to 4 again. So it's a bit bonkers, and it will make so much more sense if you actually saw it.
Yeah, I know I completely understand what he's talking about, but nobody else in this room does.
That's quite a cinematic way of working, isn't it? Often if you've got a small film shoot, you'll have specialists coming on. You'll have a whole bunch of Foley artists who come in at some point, and then a whole bunch of designers and set designers and stuff. So it's kind of quite cinematic, is it?
I actually ended up doing a film degree originally, because there was 280 game degrees, and 4 were accredited. And by the time you graduate, the next console's out, and it's a whole other thing. But even just working with, working with Peter, I realized when he started, there wasn't really roles like game designer or UI artist or whatever, and those things just grew out of the necessity of having to create a sort of a way of working in this industry, in the same way a film set is very peculiar. The sort of roles you'll get, the guy that says cows don't look like cows on films, you got to paint horses, and so he's just a guy who stitches cats together if you need a horse or something. And so in the same thing with us, we were like, okay, the needs of this game are different, so how can we mix that up a little bit? How can we try and make something a more effective pipeline for what we're doing, especially with our own engine and stuff? It really sort of radically changes how we're going to develop a game. And so in many ways, the last 18 months has been just rat-holing on that process and trying to get that going, which at the end of the day, no one sees, but it's just what you need to be able to bring the thing in super polished and efficiently on a budget and all that.
Before we end this half of the show, can you talk about when we can expect to be able to actually see the game?
So ever since I signed a deal recently to sort of take the game from what was indie to what I've been now told is triple I by Kate over there. which is the term I started using, I no longer have PR control. So I cannot go and say, oh, it's going to be here. I want to say, I really hope it will be this year. I know there's not much of it left. In fact, I was supposed to show it tomorrow at like Paris Games Week originally, and then that changed. So I really, really, really hope to see it because it's been really annoying having to sit on it for this long.
It'll be a good Christmas present for you.
That would be a great Christmas present.
Okay, and Seb, your game is much closer to being finished, and people can play it right now, downstairs.
We're planning to release early 2017.
Okay.
Yeah, and we're pretty much on schedule, so yeah, it should be good to go.
What platforms is it going to be available on?
Xbox One, PS4, and Steam.
Okay, awesome. And so people, if they want to try it, there's a load of televisions set up downstairs, right?
Yeah, you can actually play the progression of the game. So we got 3 versions of the game downstairs. The original old version that I submitted at the Game Jam, the shitty version, basically. And then some iteration that we showed in EGX Rest in April, and then the current version on the last 2 consoles.
Oh, cool. So people can kind of see the development process.
You can see the process, yeah.
Oh, that's really, really cool. What can people, for anyone who still might not have their head around exactly what they can expect when they play the game. So it's a physics-based platformer. You play as a snake. What does progression through the game look like? You just go through levels? Do you defeat
well, the
bad
main
guys?
core mechanic of the game is essentially you have to think and move like a snake, which means that simple things like moving in a straight line is hard to do. A real snake can't really move in a straight line. They always have to curve their body to generate forward momentum. So one of the core mechanics of the game is to efficiently move forward. You constantly have to keep your body curved like that, just like a real snake. Same thing applies to climbing, which is one of the main things you do as a snake, because you can't jump, so the only way to get from platform to platform is to actually climb bamboo structures mostly. And to
so
do
you
that
kind of wrap yourself around them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To efficiently climb, a snake will never just go straight up a tree. You always have to wrap around the tree, wrap around the branches, create extra hook points and friction. And so that's how you need to play the game. You really are looking for the path up and trying to curve your body in such a way to actually get there.
It's a very difficult thing to explain in audio, but it's a very
Yes.
tangible game. It feels great to kind of use the analog stick to curve this snake around all the different parts
Yeah,
of the
the
environment.
control scheme is very unique, and that's why initially it probably takes a while for people to actually do the things that we can do with the snake. But it's very easy to pick up. Everybody can play the first few levels and get up the simple obstacles, and hopefully as you go through, you'll start thinking more and more like a snake, and by the time you reach halfway the game, you should be able to fully explore your inner snake and get through get through every level, and then it starts getting even more interesting, I think, because I completely mastered the controls now. So for me, the challenge is not so much in getting to the thing, because the main objective of the game is to collect things, basically. But for me, it's not only about getting there anymore, but it's also about getting there with style, like getting there as snaky as possible.
Being a
So-
stylish snake.
Yes, yeah,
Cool.
and
Awesome.
it's just very satisfying to exactly plan your path and then get this awkward creature to actually follow exactly the path that you planned. There's something very satisfying about making him do exactly what you want.
Awesome. So yeah, if people want to try that, they should go downstairs and check it out today and have a look at the old build as well, so you can see the kind of process going through. But for now, thank you both for coming on. We're going to welcome some other guests on now, but everyone give a round of applause for Seb and Jack.
Thank you.